Hi, Dave Smith with Police One. I'm here with Roy Bedard of RRB Systems International, Inc. And Roy, you and I have known each other a long time, and we've done a lot of training together. And one of the big topics that you hear a lot of controversy about, and again, a lot of people say, well, that's settled, and then again, it pops back up. And that's the issue of neck restraints. And you teach neck restraints, and you have for years and years. What is your philosophy, first off, about the whole efficacy and the legal aspects of, well, I guess that's two big aspects of neck restraints?
I'm going to be a little less cautious than I used to be maybe 10 years ago, because I think that's the direction this technique is going, and tell you that I think it's the best technique that we have. You know, techniques ordinarily work at one of two different levels. They're either pain compliant techniques or they're going to be mechanically compliant techniques. And because of that, they're both dependent on some factors that we're not aware of when the fight starts. How much of a pain threshold does the subject have, or how big is a subject in relationship to the officer? Those are two variables we have very little control over. The neck restraint is a little bit different. It's a physiological technique. It doesn't involve pain necessarily. Of course, sometimes it does hurt when you have an application put on, but that's not why it's working. And it really works on varying sizes. It doesn't matter how big the subject is or how small the officer is. The technique will work because it's really operating at a physiological level, a lot like the taser, frankly. The taser, where it gets into your system and it causes a disruption of your own body's electrical system. That's essentially what the neck restraint does. It restricts blood flow, if done correctly in law enforcement, and causes unconsciousness. Right,
and again, you know, I come from a generation where it was very commonly used and had a very high efficiency rate. It works when it's applied properly. The question, of course, is that we saw different techniques. Some of them increase the risk, and talk about some of the risks of improperly applied neck restraints.
Well, certainly the biggest risk is a lack of training, not understanding exactly what it is that you're trying to accomplish. The neck is a sensitive area. As a matter of fact, it's extremely sensitive. It's really amazing that evolution chose to not protect that particular area. If you would design a body today, probably with knowing exactly what is below this fleshy area right here, you would be probably evolved into a large collar or a whole bunch of scales to kind of protect that area, but there's really nothing there, which is why it's such an effective technique. Because it's so effective, it can also be very dangerous, and a lack of training where you start pushing on the wrong areas or squeezing the wrong areas can be very problematic. Other problems, I think, are going to be the fact that usually when you're applying this, it's a very violent encounter. So even if it is applied properly, sometimes there can be some slipping around the neck, and it can cause the technique to shift from what was a moment ago a proper application to what now can be a very dangerous application. And then I would also say that, that another problem that you would have with neck restraints is going to be in the area of excited delirium, the concept that we believe is probably mostly responsible for it being banished almost nationwide back in the 1970s and 1980s, when it was being used a lot and being used very effectively. There was a percentage of the population that we were using it on that succumbed to death, and it was unexplained. And of course today we know a lot more about that, but the legend of the deadly neck restraint continues on, and we've done so little to come back to it and really understand how it works, why it works, and when it fails.
Well, now you train a lot of people in neck restraints. What specific techniques do you recommend that people look at, and what is your particular style?
I use a lot of different methods, and I think when you start getting extravagant with the technique, and of course today with the proliferation of MMA, you see a lot of different neck restraints, and of course you very rarely, you never see people die as a result of it. Right. Certainly, like any other combat art, if you did a full study over probably the centuries, you would probably have a few people that had died as a result from a more than likely misapplication than a case of excited delirium, because generally in the sport you don't have the same elements that you have amongst the population that law enforcement comes across quite often. But there are really two different types. You have what the combat sports refer to as naked strangles, meaning that of course you're going to be using only your bare arm, and then you have clothed strangles, which means that you're going to be using some element of cloth that the subject might be wearing to restrict the blood flow.
Sort of a judo style.
Yeah, a judo style, but a very effective style as well, because ultimately what you're trying to do is restrict blood flow, and that means that you have to put a precision amount of force into the side of the neck. And of course, if your arms are very big and your muscles are very strong, the surface area as that meets the side of the neck is going to more than likely allow blood flow to continue longer than if you were to take a smaller instrument, for instance, like the side of somebody's collar, and pull it into the flesh, where it would cause a faster cessation of blood and quicker unconsciousness.
Right, those of us who've ever had one applied can be discovered one minute you think you're winning, the next minute you're blacking out, you're tapping out. And again, it seems so rapid, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, that a properly applied neck restraint shuts a person down very, very quickly. And if you're not in a tap out, if you're not in a competitive situation, you're in a combat situation, it's very, very effective.
And what's really interesting about the neck restraint is there's been some studies on it that suggest about 80% of the time it's effective without you actually knocking somebody out. And I think part of the reason is that people recognize inherently and intuitively that when somebody's wrapped around their neck, they're in a dangerous position. They usually will surrender as a result to that. They will say, okay, you got me, uncle, and that's the end of that particular encounter. There's probably also an element of pain compliance. I think a lot of the bravado that you see during the posturing phase of a fight goes right out the window when an officer locks on and starts hurting somebody. Yeah. And the compression of that sensitive area does cause pain. It's not excruciating pain, but it's certainly, I think it probably operates at a more banal level in your mind where you're saying, this is hurting, this is a sensitive area, I should probably do what the nice officer says. And so the chances of it being effectively done are somewhere in the neighborhood, I understand, of about 80% without you actually taking them to unconsciousness. It's interesting, I have worked with agencies before, and some agencies continue to use a force continuum, and whether they have 5 or 6 categories of force, this neck restraint has become the 7th category. I've had chiefs tell me they'd rather shoot somebody than choke them. Just bad policy from an overall, I think, really lack of understanding of the technique and what it does. And also, I think because it is a political technique, it is one that is associated with a time in our history where when it was being used, we were at the high point of civil rights, and it sort of took the way of dogs and riots and fire hoses and neck restraints. People just simply don't want to talk about those techniques because of their association with another time.
Well, I think, again, one of the things that it helps whenever I try to justify any change in procedures, policies, or that, to be able to go to a resource. Have you got resources available to help people get policies changed?
Well, there are. I mean, it has to start internally, of course. I mean, there are some states now that are making a move. Of course, I'm from Florida. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement just rewrote their basic recruit curriculum last year for the first time in several years, and they included in the new curriculum the instruction of neck restraints. That wasn't easy, by the way. I mean, being on the curriculum review committee, that was a constant battle that we had as subject matter experts, trying to figure out if the effectiveness of the technique outweighed the caution of it. And obviously, we believe that it did, because we think it is a technique that can save officers' lives. We also believe that the technique in and of itself, when done correctly, is very defensible today, because we do have the medical studies and the evaluations that we didn't have 30, 40 years ago as to what's actually going on.
And if you believe in this technique, again, you got to learn how to put your documentation together. You want to be able to do your justification, and very importantly, get your right training, right?
Exactly.
Good. Roy, thank you.
Thank you.